We bought this $6,000 pre-built gaming PC from Maingear, cross-branded with a streamer named Shroud, and it even comes with its own unstable memory overclock. Normally, you have to spend hours of your own time toiling over an unstable memory overclock, but now you can have someone else do that for you for a little extra money. The marketing also claims to have a CPU overclock, and it claims to have liquid metal for the TIM, which is more in line with true enthusiast building than what we typically see for pre-built PCs. Doing liquid metal and overclocking, that's a lot more than basically any other pre-built that we've looked at, and Maingear does get credit for taking some risks with that, and we do think it's pretty cool. But it's not without problems. Now, there are some good things here. For example, Maingear has one of the best Windows installs we've seen on a pre-built. So it's ups and downs with this one, but overall we saw a lot of things that we liked. One of the things we didn't like, however, was the price. Depending on which number you take for the GPU price, it's between 40% down to 21% higher than DIY parts cost if you buy them at retail. And again, depending on which GPU you kind of reference the 50 series card. Now that is significantly better than Alienware's 50% in either of those two numbers, so at least that's nice, but it's still high. There is good reason that it's high though, Maingear thinks, and it's because, where is it? This guy's name is on the case. He's called Shroud, normally with a lowercase s, although that looked weird with all the other words being all caps on the side of this case. We're told that he's apparently a pretty good CSGO player from back when that was still live, and currently is a streamer. And that means this computer makes you good at Counter-Strike. What's more interesting to us is that Maingear is the first system integrator we've seen to use the new Haven HS420 case, which was an excellent first showing from Maingear in our benchmarks. They also shoved the screen into the side, which is another unique take on this. We found that Maingear had the cleanest operating system install we've seen in recent pre-built history. They actually did some BIOS tuning, which is a great positive as well. The choice of the 9800 X3D is welcomed as a change of pace from Intel's weird dominance in the pre-built space, but again, it is expensive, and they do need to deliver on all of those things. So let's get into the review. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Montech HSO1 and HSO2 cases. The HSO1 and HSO2 cases differ by way of a mesh front or a curved glass front. We previously reviewed these cases in our intensive benchmarking process and found them to be overall high build quality, with thermals comparable between the two designs. The rear chamber of the case uniquely brings the power supply forward and perforates the rear wall of the case, allowing for more air movement internally while providing a different look. The rear of the case uses a fan mounting mechanism for two separate fans that can be coupled together with a plate, improving convenience. The HSO1 and HSO2 also invert with minimal effort, allowing the computer to present to the opposite side without needing to reconfigure the entire build. Learn more at the links in the description below. So getting into the computer, we bought this for a few reasons. One of them is because it has the Haven HS420, so this is one of the first pre-builts we've seen with this case, and that alone made it interesting because this case, as good in some ways as it is, it's really particular with how it's configured, and we thought it'd be a good test to see if Maingear was paying attention to how it should be configured. We also bought it because it was one of their first builds with the 50 series cards in it, and it also happens to be cross-branded with Shroud. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I do not know anything about Shroud. I'm aware of the name. I know absolutely nothing about his career or highlights or anything like that. What I do know, though, is that Jeremy on our team, who worked on the review for this, has been killed multiple times in PUBG by Shroud. So we're basically experts on his internet presence. We can see that Maingear likes Shroud so much that it made an entire line of pre-built gaming PCs named after him. There's the custom Shroud Edition, the $7,300 Shroud Signature Edition Mark II that launched more recently, and the absent middle child that we have for review today. This is the original Shroud Signature Edition from the 5090 launch, and we're calling it the Mark I. Currently, we can only find it via archive.org's Wayback Machine at the time of writing, despite only being a few months old and costing $6,000. And as an aside, we currently have an archive.org donation drive on our store with the Honeypot t-shirts. Archive has earned its donation once again by enabling us to see a page that's oddly recent to have disappeared from the internet. Anyway, the system has a 9800 X3D, the RTX 5090 in it, and 48 gigabytes of custom-tuned DDR5 8000 that apparently increases your chance at hitting headshots. The question we have is whether it's worth the chance of the system crashing. Here's the breakdown of parts and price comparison versus DIY. The good news is that almost all of the parts are available at retail. The exception is Maingear's self-branded 420mm so-called Epic liquid cooler, but we can sub out another liquid cooler for that. Overall, the parts list is mostly parts that make sense together, with the potential exception of the ASRock motherboard with an X3D CPU due to ASRock's issues with killing some X3D CPUs. We interviewed ASRock at Computex this year in case you want to learn more about that. They think it's fixed. Reddit still has ongoing posts about it. We calculated 2 different DIY totals for this, since the $2,000 RTX 5090 FE is basically unobtainable. With the FE, DIY is just under $4,300. With the cheapest partner 5090 we could find at the time of writing, which obviously is going to change daily, the $2,650 Gigabyte Windforce was available, and that puts the total at about $4,950 for DIY. We paid $6,000 for the system, so that puts the difference at $1,700 with the FE, which is in absolute crazy territory for the Delta. But that's if you can get a 5090 at that price. The Gigabyte Windforce would put it at $1,050 on top of DIY parts cost instead of $1,700. Still high, but not quite as insane when viewed as a 21% increase instead. The Alienware Area 51 that we just reviewed was at 50% over, and the Origin Genesis was at 34%, depending on if you compared against the original price or the later $8,400 price. To try and understand why Maingear thinks this is worth that price, we turned to the lifeblood of this industry: marketing. The Signature Edition is co-developed, they say, by Shroud and Maingear, and is pitched as the exact hardware and settings used in his main PC. It's got custom decals in various places around the Haven HS420V GPU case, and a riveted badge that's, quote, inspired by Shroud's personal pinball machine collection, end quote. Okay then. Weirdly, Maingear neglects to mention Haven anywhere on the page, listing the case as the, quote, Maingear Shroud Signature Edition case, end quote. Now that's unfortunate for Haven, especially seeing as the HS420 really deserves the recognition. The system is advertised as overclocked right out of the box, both on the 9800X3D CPU and the aforementioned headshot boosting DDR5 8000 RAM Headshot Edition. Factory OC is rare for a pre-built and essentially unheard of on RAM, so we'll validate those claims later. It's a cool idea though. Maingear directly advertises reliability and the overclock in the same sentence, which is bold. And also incorrect. But it was bold. Also interesting is the claimed use of liquid metal TIM on the CPU. Now, this is interesting, and we'll take a look at that. First of all, on one hand, it's exciting that, again, Maingear is doing actual enthusiast things with its pre-built computers. On the other hand, using liquid metal on a lidded CPU has significantly less impact than on a delidded CPU, where it really excels, especially when getting rid of that silicone adhesive around the IHS, securing it to the substrate. But just putting it on top of the IHS doesn't have nearly as much impact, and it also introduces some risk if not done carefully by Maingear. So we'll take a close look at that in the teardown. For the rest, there's a 1920 by 720 display inside, covering the drive bay area and the HS420. It's connected to the 9800X3D's integrated graphics via a USB-C cable that routes out to the rear I/O. Maingear suggests that it's perfect for chat, but the curve in the glass sits directly between the screen and the user in the normal desk position. That's fine though, because everybody knows that screens like this are actually for waifus. They're normally for waifus. As part of the so-called Maingear difference, it boasts, quote, 100% zero bloatware. It's a confusing concept grammatically, but we can appreciate it practically. And in part of our review, we'll inspect the OS, because a clean OS is ideal, and in fact, 100% of zero would be the exact right share of bloatware to have in an operating system. We normally prefer 100% of zero. All right, so now we're going to do a teardown of the Shroud Signature PC and see how their build quality is. So this Haven case, one of the reasons I liked it was the way this panel mechanically slots in. Like they did a really good job with this. But that's a Haven thing. And then we'll pull this panel and reveal the cable management. So on the back side, they are using extensions. So these are cable extensions. It does introduce one more point of failure, more of a concern with 12-volt high power. Let's see, is that a straight cable or is that an extension? The 12-volt high power is actually a replacement cable, so that was smart of them, meaning this is going all the way into the power supply, straight from the PSU to the GPU. So instead of doing an extension like we're seeing on this 24-pin, it's a straight shot, which is good because reducing points of failure on a 12-volt high power is really what they need to be doing. But these are all just extensions. They look nice at least. Not as good as a replacement, but it is it's more of a look thing. Let's get into some of the internals. First of all, they are using the vertical GPU mount, and this glass pane here, so this is supposed to be kind of like a flow guide, the idea being it shoots the air up and out the glass, and then that kind of like bounces or at least drifts up. In our testing, this hindered performance, not in a big way, but it definitely didn't help, and actually having the fans flat performed better in our testing for the case review. So this is like a suboptimal configuration. It's okay, Their bigger problem is not really utilizing the fan speeds the way they should be, but this doesn't do anything. It's just more of just becomes a shroud that is labeled shroud, as this one is. The gap here between the GPU and the glass plate, this needs to be much closer. So Haven actually recommends it too, and in our testing, but the closer this bottom edge is to the actual top edge of the glass cover, the better. And the issue being here that it's not really going to interface properly with the way the air is blowing from these fans, and they end up with potential recirculation issues. Haven recommends, and they are correct, doing intake in the bottom and doing exhaust in the top. And what's actually happening here is both of these are pointed the same way. These are both reverse blade fans, and so they are both intake. And so it's not really following the recommendation. Now, we'd have to flip it in this specific case, but in our testing previously, it did work better to do it the way I just described. The bottom is intake. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is just pull the video card, because since it's vertically mounted, it's kind of in my way right now. And let's see, we've got this possibly 3D printed bracket screwed into it. This is definitely custom. I don't know if it's 3D printed or not, feels like it. But we're gonna have to remove that. And then in the back, we're gonna have to pull this vertical kit off. This is, I just remember this being a huge pain in the ass when we worked on this case. What is that? So that is 2mm Allen. All right, I have to remember how to use this. All right, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna lift this. Just waiting for like the Wile E. Coyote moment where everything else falls out from under it and it's just floating. So that gives us access to here. This is not the correct way to do this. What I'm trying to do is leave the glass and the fans in the bottom in place. Ow. Man. That is what separates us from monkeys and primates. It's the ability to understand a leverage and apply it. Card should be free. Okay, we've rescued the RTX 5090. Now we can actually disassemble the computer. Ugh. It's okay, it's only glass. Oh, it's got the ASRock release. Okay. All right, that's the vertical GPU mount. Do you see how fun and easy it is to remove? Now we get into the actual computer from Maingear. I'm gonna lay this down. We'll start the actual disassembly for real. So taking this apart should be pretty simple now. I've already loosened that, so we can just kind of let that float. And we're gonna start with the cables like normally. So 12 high power is already disconnected. I was happy to see that was not an extension. I was worried about that. 24 pin was fully seated. That's gonna be USB. That's the Type-C in the front. All good. Pump and fan headers. So they've got the pump plugged into AIO_pump. That's good. That's where it should be. And then the CPU fans and CPU fan. It's also good. You can actually see here, really tiny detail, but these cables coming out of the pump block, they've routed them around the lawn way, around this screw, which just cleans it up. And then they've kind of slightly tucked it under the corner of this VRM heatsink. So that's nice. It's really small attention to detail. It's the kind of stuff that you want to see from a pre-built. These were fully seated. So cables, they pass. No problem on the cables. So these are the memory modules. This is a team group stick. All right, let's pull this. This is the pump for the liquid coolers. So this is Maingear branded. They've got Fantex fans on it. And Maingear definitely doesn't like actually make liquid coolers. So they're working to sort of white label these, which is what a lot of SIs do. That's fine. All right, wow, I forgot about the liquid metal. That is extremely lackluster application. I'm really disappointed in that. Man, yeah, this should have been done better. This is kind of disappointing. So they didn't apply it all the way around, so they're not leveraging the whole IHS. Now the actual difference in using the whole IHS is like, it should be relatively minor. I haven't tested it with liquid metal. With paste I have. It can be like 1 degree or 2 degrees in a really bad situation, but they should still be using it, because that's what you're paying an SI for. There's a droplet of liquid metal right there, you can see. So there's a tiny drop there, which is one of the risks of liquid metal. Now, these are covered with that. That may be a nail polish, might be a glue. It looks like the one that's applied at the factory. All the components are covered, and here's what I was worried about was the pads. Here are these unpopulated spots. Those are also covered. I couldn't see it in the socket, but they are covered. So they have protected the components. The reason you have to do that is liquid metal is conductive, it is metal, and so liquid metal, wow, look at that blob right there. I'll take a look at the footage and see if that was there just from me pulling it or if it was always there. But protecting it from the components so that like this blob that's down in between those two legs in this bottom right corner, that piece of liquid metal without anything covering the parts, that would cause a short. It could bridge to MLCCs or something, and then it could kill the chip, or at least the part. So anyway, this is not the best. I want to see better liquid metal application. Like if you're going to do it right. Cover the whole damn thing. You're already in there. So that's pretty disappointing. That's just lazy. And then for this, you do have to apply liquid metal to both sides. It's not clear if they applied it to this side or if it just got kind of pulled up from the CPU IHS. But one of the other issues with liquid metal is applying it to just bare copper like this can definitely transfer and kind of plate the copper. We've talked about this with Roman, with their Bauer in the past, versus something like a nickel-plated copper would be much more protected. So this is really just not the right application, and the use case is for sure suboptimal, which is probably why they moved away from the liquid metal advertising in the later revision. It's not enough on this side. This is way too light. Liquid metal needs to contact liquid metal from both sides. It's got to be from the top of the thing you're cooling and from the bottom of the thing that's doing the cooling. The reason for that is surface tension. It needs to mate liquid metal to liquid metal. Otherwise, there's potential for gaps and poor performance as a result of it. And also just from the surface tension, it's going to kind of pull away when it's all clamped together. So this was not done well. That'll work. So this is the other downside with liquid metal is it kind of gets everywhere if because it'll pull away from just gravity and getting whipped around and stuff. So if you were to ever maintain a system like this, you would have to contend with that. And this is what I'm talking about right here. So we're just gonna, the reason this is important to catch whenever you see it is because it can get in there and cause a short. All right, so that is all the way in. We're gonna check that all of these are fully seated and secured. Well, that's definitely secured because that is basically bound to the standoff. That one was secure. I haven't had this happen in a long time, but we've got a classic case of they torqued the hell out of the screw into the standoff, but as you can see, the standoff itself is what's unscrewing, not the screw. So I need to grab something to hold the standoff. We're getting our steps in today. That means we have to grab it from here, and then I need to unscrew it from the top while holding the standoff in place. Okay, there we go. And check that out right there. Let's check the last thing on the board, which is going to be the SSD. We've had companies fail on this step before, including Alienware recently. I actually don't know how to use this particular one. It's not a screw. Is it a pull? Not pull. What is this alien technology? I don't use the ASRock boards, mostly because I like my CPUs to live. Okay. All right, cool. So they did remove any of the plastic that was on here. That's good. And then thanks to Alienware, we now also need to look for bent SSDs, which this is not. That is also good. All right, so that's the SSD out. making contact with thermal pads on both sides. And this is an ASRock thing here, but it's always nice to have it cooled from both directions. Really, it's the controller that needs the cooling. The flash technically likes being warm to a certain extent, and then they've peeled the plastic on both Maingear, that is, which sounds like a stupid thing to point out, but unfortunately, that is something we need to point out. That is it for the teardown. There's a lot more work than normally, mostly thanks to the liquid metal and not trying to get it everywhere. So I'd like to see the liquid metal application improve. It's not good. It's like passable, but they could do so much more with this. And it's got to be well applied on both sides. It should ideally be all of it, like the whole IHS. And it's not making great contact right now. So that's what we'd like to see improved. But let's get back to the rest of the review of the Prebuilt as it was delivered. We'll start with thermal benchmarks. A full system load at steady state has the GPU at 80 degrees Celsius and GPU memory at 96.5 degrees Celsius, which we think is unacceptably high for the memory. The core is okay here. Despite NVIDIA's FE design being so good overall, its memory can sometimes run hot in some configurations, and this is one of them. As the system ages, the pads age, and dust enters the system, we worry about the memory temperature long term. CPU temperature was 84 degrees Celsius with a 420mm liquid cooler, with the chipset at 74 at the hottest as a result of getting dumped on by the GPU. We'll need to look at noise levels and power consumption from the overclock to better understand if these numbers make sense. Other temperatures assorted were fine. Now we'll briefly plot CPU and chipset temperatures against the fan speeds to see how Maingear's custom fan curve plays out. CPU temperature rapidly rises at the start of the test and eventually hits the 80s. The AIO pump stays constant for RPM, while the CPU main fan stair steps before settling in just under 1600 RPM. Overall, this kind of curve mostly makes sense. The biggest downside, though, is that the chassis fans aren't doing much at under 700 RPM, rendering them to basically being RGB ornaments and limiting their usefulness for something like GPU memory thermals. Adding the chipset 2 sensor to the chart again illustrates the general heat dump from the GPU with flow-through design. Moving on to GPU thermals over time shows an interesting start as core and memory temperatures steadily increase during the initial idle period of the test, and then a steep decline as the fans kick in. After that, they climb to unacceptably hot on the memory and about 80 C for the GPU temperature. 80 is fine for the GPU core. The same goes for the fans. The initial rise to 30% and subsequent quick ramp to 50% are expected. This is a bar chart comparing the average all-core frequency performance for the 9800X2D at steady state in a separate all-core blender workload. Maingear's overclocking claims fall short as the pre-built configuration ran at 5157 MHz average, 68 MHz slower than in our original review of the CPU when it was tested stock and out of the box without any overclocking. Maingear's overclock is not actually overclocking the CPU, it's actually performing lower than the expectation. Maingear's website states, quote, amplified by Liquid Metal TIM and AMD's 3D V-Cache technology, the AMD Ryzen 9800X2D utilizes 104 megabytes of on-chip memory to deliver massive gaming performance boosts to the overclocked 8-core processor, maximizing frame rate output on the most popular and demanding games, end quote. So for all that, with the liquid metal, 420mm liquid cooler, and use of aggressive PBO settings, Maingear manages to fall short of actually delivering on its promise. Part of this is because of how Maingear used PBO without fine-tuning, but the marketing sets clear expectations. They need to have good acoustics to be worth this trade-off. Acoustic testing is performed in our hemi-anechoic chamber, which we built a couple years ago for around $250,000 and have used regularly since then. The chamber has allowed us new insights into cases and coolers and reviews, and also gets a lot of use for pre-built reviews. We use it heavily in case testing especially. For noise over time, the system started out at a very low 16.9 dBA during the idle period, before rising to roughly 25 to 26 dBA during the first few minutes of load when measured at 1 meter, and then roughly running at 27.1 dBA at steady state. We don't have any complaints about the noise in the Shroud Signature Edition. Maingear did do well here, but the trade-off is clear in our earlier thermal results. Maingear has room acoustically to get a little more aggressive on noise to combat these thermal concerns with the VRAM, particularly in some of the underutilized chassis fans. And even then, reducing some of the CPU fan speed to increase some of the fan speed elsewhere in the case would allow a balance of maintaining the noise while still improving the overall thermals. Full system power consumption during the full torture workload started out at an average of 153 watts when idle. That's higher than the Origin Genesis's roughly 125 watts idle, and that had a full-size water cooling pump. This is due to the internal screen taking additional power plus all of the LEDs. After the load was established, the system shot up to about 840 watts and stayed there, very slowly rising to 860 watts at steady state. We need to understand what Maingear did for this overclock, so we're getting into BIOS. Jumping into BIOS for the first time was extremely laggy and slow on this system, and maddeningly, not all of the inputs went through. A reboot at least fixed it. We checked out the ASRock X870E Nova Wi-Fi BIOS version, which was 3.17. That came with the system. This revision isn't publicly available anymore at the time of writing, but research pointed to it being launched in January 2025. It had beta versions before that. The PC was built near the very end of February, meaning that version 3.20, released on the 24th of February, should have been installed and would have aligned with the build timeline. The possible exception is if Maingear has an actual thorough process to make sure the OC settings work on newer BIOS versions, potentially requiring validation. Version 3.25 did not exist yet, so that's fine that it's not on here. It came with two profiles already saved. The default profile, named MG Shroud OC, sets AMD's PBO to its most aggressive settings and has numerous tweaks to the system memory. And these indicate a genuinely custom OC, which is pretty cool. Voltages, miscellaneous settings like DDR5 Nitro mode, and even tightened timings at 34, 48, 48, 86 with a 1T command rate all show manual tuning. The extreme memory profile for this kit uses primary timings of 38, 48, 48, 84, so Maingear did actually manually modify the settings, which is pretty cool. We can respect that and credit to them for being more like actual enthusiasts. But also like actual enthusiasts, this isn't fully stable. And yes, we did just roast the entire audience, kind of like how the VRAM roasts on the FE GPU. We didn't experience any crashes in the earlier thermal testing, but workloads are highly varied, and they don't always trigger problems. Explicitly testing the memory revealed instability and caused a crash when we set it to run over the weekend. We also saw multiple errors within minutes under memtest 64 and a full system crash within hours of launching OCCT's RAM test. So at best, you might be able to call this overclock game stable by people who want to cope. But it's not actually stable, and that means it's only a matter of time before you run into some kind of game even where it is also not stable. You also wouldn't want to do any meaningful actual work on a system with unstable memory because it could result in loss of data. This is a huge fumble that indicates Maingear's testing isn't rigorous enough. The other profile, MG Stock OC, switches the CPU to auto PBO instead of the more aggressive settings on the Shroud profile. It also drops some of the memory-related voltages and loosens the RAM timings back to the XMP numbers. This is not the default profile, though. The BIOS showed other signs of care, like the auto driver installer being disabled, which we really appreciate, and custom fan curves all around. SIs normally leave fans set to whatever the motherboard does by default, so this is cool to see. Maingear is doing cool stuff in the BIOS, but they need to perform more exhaustive stability testing. Windows is next. Maingear wins points for setting up the Windows 11 installer to automatically include the I don't have internet button on the first go. Normally you have to do the OOBE workaround to get around this, but with the pre-built, we expect the average user is not aware of how to bypass the internet mandated setup, so it's cool that Maingear did something here. They must have customized the install to just force this out of the box, and that's great because it's the only way to make a local account. And Microsoft keeps taking steps to make workarounds more difficult with each update. There were no additional agreements, and there was no data harvesting attempts tacked on at the end either, which we've seen in the past. This is one of the best things that Maingear did for the system. The desktop itself was clean, with no bloatware on the desktop or in the start menu or the tray. We guess this really is what 100% zero looks like. Scientists have said that humans can't conceptualize nothingness for centuries, and yet here we are, with Maingear showing us what 100% zero looks like with the Windows desktop. And that's a good thing. There were no missing drivers, and the NVIDIA driver version was 572.60, which was released February 27th, so that's as up-to-date as it could be when it was built. Overall, we'd put Maingear's OS setup into the great category. Unfortunately, the internal screen gave us trouble. It didn't even detect on first boot, which is a big problem, and it was a toss-up if it would come on with subsequent boots. Unplugging and reconnecting the rear USB-C cable gets it going again, but even then we had to manually change the screen orientation in Windows. This is annoying and disappointing for a main feature. The upside is that there's no custom software. The downside is that relying on Windows to guess the right setup isn't going to work. We think the issue stems at least partly from using the IGP for this. Packaging was simple, with soft foam inside to protect the PC. Ours came with a hole in the box, but there wasn't any damage to the system. We would have liked to see more protection for a $6,000 computer. Doesn't need to be an Origin wooden crate, but sturdier cardboard boxes would be good for safety. Aside from the PC, there was a QA checklist, some stickers, and the standard case, motherboard, and power supply extras, and we do like it when the companies include the component accessories that they otherwise wouldn't have a use for. The quick start guide was a mixed bag. On one hand, it had good basics like warning to remove any foam inside the build, though there wasn't any in our case, and instructions to make sure the power supply was switched on. On the other hand, don't ask, it says, quote, connect secondary monitor to USB-C here, end quote, referring to the motherboard I/O. This is a very strange instruction. We're pretty sure that they mean the internal screen, but it's not immediately clear based on the vague language, and it doesn't matter what we think because we can interpret this stuff and make it work. It matters what a customer who doesn't have any idea what they're doing thinks, and saying secondary monitor definitely conveys to most people probably another actual screen. It's not until we went to the link on the QR code that it became clear, and we think Maingear should update this section of the guide. Finally, Maingear has a trade-in program specifically for this PC. The company says that when it upgrades a component in Shroud's personal PC, it'll notify all Signature Edition customers via an email that details the upgrade and its alleged performance boost. Cynically, we think the point of this is to use FOMO marketing on parasocial whales. There's only a 14-day decision window, so clearly time pressure is part of the plan. We haven't received an offer like this, as far as we can tell, unless it went to spam or something, which is possible with a promo email, but the currently advertised Signature Edition has a higher-end CPU versus our original model. We feel like that should have qualified as an upgrade opportunity, although it doesn't seem worth taking anyway. CPU, motherboard, and power supply upgrades require sending the PC to Maingear, while RAM and storage will be handled by mail. Labor is free for the Shroud-specific upgrades, but customers have to buy the parts and pay for shipping labels from Maingear. The Maingear Shroud Signature Edition pre-built PC is an interesting mix of highs and lows, where they do some really cool stuff. Some of it works out okay, some of it doesn't. In the very least, from an enthusiast standpoint in PC building, Maingear appears to be trying more and taking more risks than their competitors in pre-builts, and we can respect that. It needs to be stable and it needs to work, but it's cool that they're doing it, and again, some of those things did work out. From a value standpoint, $1,000 to $1,700 price increase over DIY parts cost at retail is a big jump. That 21% at the lower end, if you're looking at $3,000 5090s, which is obviously it's just awful because they should be much lower than that, but at the 21% with that number in assumption, it's not as bad. I guess for something that's cross-branded, you kind of expect that. The best we've seen was the Thermaltake Vista, I think it was called, 470M or something, pre-built we reviewed, and that one was something like 7% over the cost of buying all the parts DIY, and that was a good deal. But this is still high. The 40% is much higher if you assume a $2,000 5090. But Alienware and Origin set the bar at such an awful level that it's like slowly creeping down and getting better. Where Origin, if you take that $8,400 price, they had it listed as, I don't know if it still is now, but that was not, it was just like offensively bad. Alienware was about 50% higher than DIY parts cost, so still pretty bad, but improving for Alienware. And then this one's getting a little lower than that still. And the next things we're going to look at, we're going to try and get some in that are on the cheaper side and get some more reasonable stuff too. But this is a good revisit for Maingear. We haven't looked at them in a while. There are some serious negatives to the system, but also serious positives. We haven't run into a pre-built like this in a while. The operating system setup is excellent. Extra steps taken to enable local accounts without the users needing to know how to modify the OOBE parameters is nice, because most users won't know that. Tuning in BIOS is well appreciated, but with the stability issues being problematic and unacceptable. Thermals are mostly okay, with the exception of the FE's VRAM temperature, and this could be partially combated by Maingear with better configuration of the case and fan speeds, as we showed in our HS420 review, and with better utilization of the chassis fans that basically serve as decorations at the current speeds. From an aesthetic standpoint, we think the customizations to the Haven HS420 are overall fine, if you're a fan of Shroud, without them going overboard. And on the bad side, the prominently featured internal screen has to be babied into working consistently. Worse is the unstable RAM OC. It's a unique selling point, so we'd like to see the company nail this next time. Price is also pretty high, but again, not as offensive as others. So that's it for this one. I would say overall, despite the negatives are less completely disqualifying than in like the Origin system. And it is nice, again, to see Maingear actually trying some things, but we got to get some cheaper stuff in next. Actually, the last Maingear one we reviewed was one of their cheaper models at the time, and we'll look at some of that stuff, see how everyone's doing with the, say, $1,000 to, I don't know, I'd like to get some $1,000 to $1,500 models in, pre-built. Right now, the stuff that's under $1,000 is, a lot of it's just like really awful configurations, but if you see one that's good, let us know, because we're looking for stuff that is specifically good and a decent value to get in. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, or store.gamersnexus.net to grab something like one of our GN15 mod mats, our project and soldering mats available in multiple colors, our dice kits, or our shirts and other items. All this directly helps fund our ability to independently purchase and review pre-builds like this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.